Hello. Welcome to Josh and Austin Figure It Out. This is a podcast that we're starting today, right now. My name is Josh Larson. It's nice to meet you. And I'm joined by
Austin Crim. Nice to meet you as well. We're glad that you decided to join us on this inaugural episode.
Yeah, what a treat. We've been chatting, Austin and I, for a number of, weeks about having a podcast and doing one. It would be fun to do a podcast. And then finally Austin's like, well, should we actually do a podcast? And he made a Google Doc. And now we're here recording a podcast.
I think the moral is if you want something to happen in life, it all starts with a Google Doc and an email. And that's really all that you have to do.
I think that's pretty accurate. If you're joining us for the first time, which all of you are because we've never recorded a podcast together before. Here's some things about us. We're both located here in Iowa, pretty near each other. Iowa is a state in the United States in the Midwest, if you're joining us from out of the country. It is in the northern hemisphere. And we both grew up here and actually grew up in like the same small town, which is wild because we didn't meet until well after graduating. So maybe we should start with that. I know Austin from Twitter, and I know you have been involved in definitely the remix and svelte conversations, which are JavaScript frameworks. Parents who are listening and have never heard of JavaScript things before, but yeah. So I've seen your stuff pop up before. I had back in 2022, and I was on a podcast called FS Jam. And you listened and heard me.
Yes, that's true. FS Jam was put on by Anthony and Chris, and I was pals with Anthony from a Discord server started by Michael Chantastic. Those in the JavaScript community might know Michael, but we were hanging out in Discord. So I knew Anthony, was a longtime listener of FS Jam, and heard Josh's episode, and I think that was the first time I realized I think that there might be other people in Iowa that also do JavaScript and are in the JavaScript community and maybe follow some of the same people that I do on Twitter and do that kind of thing. But yeah, that was exciting. So I heard that ep. I messaged Josh on Twitter. I believe you were actually on FS Jam chatting about Flare React. Is that true?
Yeah, probably. I think it was hydrogen.
Oh, hydrogen. That's right.
Yeah, because that would have been. But I probably also talked about Flare React because that was relatively recent as well.
Yes, yeah. So I had seen Flare React in the past. I had seen a bit of hydrogen. I know hydrogen was in the news at the time because of the React server components stuff that you folks were trying to take on very early days in the RSC story. But yeah, I reached out to Josh. We chatted in DM, then we chatted in real life. At various coffee shops across central Iowa and
the Des Moines Metro.
In the Des Moines Metro, and decided that we should start recording our conversations, and it's more convenient to do it from home than to bring our mics to the coffee shop. So that's the podcast.
Yeah. And it wasn't until we started talking and that I realized, wait, are you from this town called Stratford, Iowa, which is all of 800 people, about an hour north of here? And you were like, yeah. And I even went even further and had talked to my family and wondered if they had known your family. And it turns out that our parents went to high school together. My aunt was like good friends with your mom. Yeah. And so this goes way back. This is back in the 70s.
Yeah. And the podcast has been in the works since the era of disco. And it's incredible that it took the invention of React server components to bring us together after our relatives were friends in the way back. But here we are. Yeah. It's meant to happen.
Yeah. Austin, do you want to tell me a little bit about your career? Because this podcast is going to be pretty focused on tech stuff. My AirPods keep falling out, which is super. Oh, no. I'm going to have to figure something out. Oh, we haven't even talked about the premise of this podcast yet.
Well, we've got lots of time. We've got lots of time.
Oh, I want to say so many things. It's probably going to be a podcast where we try to learn something each time. And so it's called Josh and Austin Figure It Out. And it's probably going to be tech adjacent. And we'll do some deep dives. But it doesn't mean we won't talk about life and stuff. But yeah, that's our thing. We'll figure out various things. But Austin, will you tell me about your career? How did you get to this point?
Yeah, happy to. So I Have a semi-traditional, semi-non-traditional route into tech. So my dad was a mainframe programmer at Iowa State University for basically his entire career. So wrote a lot of COBOL. And when I was of the age trying to figure out what to do for school and the rest of my life, he said, you should also write COBOL because that's what I did. And it's a good career. And everyone else that writes COBOL is also my dad's age and retiring soon. I said, sure. I don't often just take him at his word like that and make major life decisions, but I didn't have any better ideas. I said, yeah. So I went to community college, a small community college in southern Iowa that actually had a COBOL and mainframe specialization. So I did an associate's degree there, learned all about mainframes and COBOL programming, and did a little bit of JavaScript and C#, and they gave us a survey of different programming languages. But out of that, I landed a job doing mainframe and COBOL at 20 years old. So my Twitter bio says I was most likely the youngest professional COBOL developer at some point.
Yeah, it's every
at
boy's
some point.
dream.
I have no way to verify that claim, but I'm just going to say that it's true. So yeah, I did COBOL at a very large financial organization here in the metro. Did that for a handful of years and was curious if there are other languages that had been invented in the 21st century, and there are. Yeah. So yeah, I did basically taught myself JavaScript and modern web development in my spare time because I just really loved the idea of the web and working on the web and doing programming in an environment that has such massive distribution and simple deployment mechanics after coming from the mainframe world. It was a breath of fresh air. So dove into web development, ended up transferring internally to a different team and did Next.js for a large customer-facing dashboard. Did that for a couple of years and ended up actually at Prisma during my self-teaching arc. I stumbled across Prisma, which is a TypeScript ORM / VC-backed software as a service company, and joined my first startup doing kind of developer experience and customer support. So if you search any Prisma GitHub issues or GitHub discussions, you'll find my name. Nice. Trying to answer questions and help out, and did some documentation work and some informational live streaming, things like that. Did that for a year, then worked at a web agency for a year and did a bunch more Next.js, but also a bunch of Svelte and SvelteKit, which is, I'm sure we'll chat about many times throughout the course of the podcast, so I'm a big fan. So did that for a little while and have actually ended up back at the large financial organization again, but this time doing React Native. So I've touched a lot of different tech across my relatively short career, but I've had a good time. I've had a good time all along the way, and I'm happy to dive into any piece of that as the show goes along. But that's me.
I'm sure we will. Maybe we should do a whole episode on COBOL and
we should.
How do you update a mainframe? Do you walk over with the floppy disk and plug it in and press a button and hope everything?
You'll have to subscribe for that episode to find out all the dozens of listeners that I'm sure are dying to know the answers to these questions.
There are dozens of people who would love to know that.
Josh, tell me about you. Yeah. What did you work on and how did you get here?
I went to Iowa State University where you said your dad worked.
Yep.
We did not work together. I was a student. And I studied journalism and Spanish. It's a clear path to how I ended up here.
Yeah, clearly.
I was very interested in computers and assembling them, trying to network them, build little web pages with whatever tripod, angelfire.com back in the day. But then ended up getting a job as a student web developer in college for a financial aid department, which was very educational and a fun gig. Then I graduated with journalism and did journalism as a TV producer for about 6 months, but found that was not what I wanted to do. And then applied my self-taught web development skills to work at an ad agency for 4 years, which was like a very small startup ad agency doing a lot of WordPress development. And that was a ton of fun. I learned a lot and built a lot of cool stuff. Ended up leaving and going to Vox Media. It was my first remote job where I was focused on the ad side of things. And so building ad technology that runs in your browser, primarily like client-side JavaScript, but also Rails for the back end, and I think a touch of Next.js there as well for about 4 years. And then I left to go to Shopify, where I am at now, where I worked on a number of things, most notably the Hydrogen project, creating like a React Meta framework for custom storefronts. And now I'm more in the admin side of the world of Shopify. So building and extending the Shopify web admin. And so that's where I am today. It's been a fun journey. And I think we can probably touch on this quite a bit as well, but we both made a switch from in-person to remote and then back in person for you, a hybrid thing. But that's certainly, like you said, are there more people in Iowa who are into this kind of the cool tech stuff? And yes, there are. It's just like we're all sitting in our basements at home. Yeah. We're not talking. And so this is one of the treats of getting together and talking.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's Diaries of Repressed Remote Workers is maybe the parenthetical title for our podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So here's the plan. We wanted to do a theme for every episode. So Josh and Austin figure out blank. And since it's the first episode, we're figuring out how to record a podcast, really, is what it is. Yep. We're using Riverside to record this. Hopefully it sounds good or looks good if you're looking at our faces. So I was thinking today we should start by figuring out a problem that we're having. It could be like tech related. It could be, I don't know, it could be anything. And it's like a help me get unblocked thing. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's where we can start. And then we can be more prepared in future episodes where we dive into a certain topic and try to learn more about it. How's that sound?
That sounds great to me, Josh.
Terrific. Do you have anything that you're stuck on right now? Any bugs? Anything that you're like, gosh, I really don't understand this and I wish I did?
Mm-hmm. I got two things for you to solve for me.
Let's dive in.
And the first one is Docker. Do you know anything about Docker, Josh?
Gosh, I did back in the day.
Can I to pass Josh?
Please do. Let me call him up. Josh from 4 years ago without kids?
Yeah. I assume someone uses Docker at Shopify.
Yeah, I think we use it quite a bit in an abstracted layer and in production maybe, and maybe not proper Docker anymore since they commercialized it, but some variation of it. But I definitely used it a lot at Vox Media back in the day.
That they commercialized it. That's actually what I'm working on, is how to not use Docker desktop at a very large enterprise because it costs money now, or it's going to.
A lot of money for a lot.
A lot. Have about 20,000 employees. Not all in the software engineering space, but a good number of employees. That would be prohibitively expensive, or at least not something that we want to spend money on. So I have been looking at using an alternative, Docker alternative, or something in that realm to help develop like AWS Lambdas locally, which is a whole other can of worms. Maybe in a future episode we can chat about doing that. Yeah. But AWS has something called the SAM CLI that is typically recommended to invoke your Lambdas from your laptop, which depends on Docker. And it's a pretty big blocker for our team. And I've been hip deep in terminal errors and logs and old GitHub issues that were never resolved, and trying to figure out, is it even possible to do this without Docker? And I'm coming up empty. So there's a couple of concepts that I don't know very much about Docker. So I'm not sure why this Jira ticket was assigned to me. But it was. And when you're at an enterprise, you get a Jira ticket and you just start going. You just start cranking. So there's Docker Desktop. There's the Docker daemon. There's Docker Compose. And Docker Desktop seems like it's inextricably tied to the CLI or the daemon, or being able to use whatever integration point there is with the AWS SAM CLI. And I'm having a very hard time, and I don't really know if this is possible. Josh, or past Josh, feel free to answer me. Where do I go from here?
Yeah, I think my first instinct is that if you can't use Docker, there's a couple things. If AWS has this CLI, this command line tool which requires Docker, it seems like there's got to be thousands of other people who are like dying for something that's not tied to Docker. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Are they aware of that? And like, do they have like a way to a different thing?
Yeah, I've read this GitHub issue. It's a very popular GitHub issue in the SAM CLI repo of people asking about this. And I think the last word that we got from an AWS employee was AWS depends on Docker to do their development for this specific tool. So they're going to develop it meant specifically to be used with Docker. So I don't think they're going to be providing any official support in the near term to use like a Docker replacement. So some of those replacements would be like Kalima. I don't know how that's pronounced. I've never said that out loud before. And Podman.
Podman, yeah, I think that's probably what I've used most recently.
Yeah, so they said we're not interested in officially supporting those other ones, but if you can figure it out on your own, then feel free.
And then the last question I have about the AWS thing, is it something that's literally calling out to AWS and running Lambda, or is it running it locally, like in a Docker container?
I believe it's running the Lambda like runtime and image locally in a Docker container, and then you send in an event and it calls your handler for you.
So it is necessary to have some sort of containerized like image that runs and executes a script. I think the way that Podman was built is so that it can be a drop-in replacement, honestly, for Docker. Even with a Docker file or a container file, you can just run Podman instead. And I think there's, like you mentioned, there's stuff that's related to Docker in different forms, whether it's Docker desktop or the Docker CLI or the Docker daemon. And it's confusing because it seems like they're all the same thing. But Docker, the CLI, I think you obviously use it as a command line argument that talks to the daemon and runs a thing. The daemon is running the container behind the scenes. And then Docker desktop is essentially the GUI version of that. So I wonder if like Podman could sneak in there and maybe replace the daemon part. But at the end of the day, is that still going to require you to install Docker and then pay millions of dollars?
Yeah. So the second part to my question is because it's not that I didn't have faith in you, Josh, but I didn't expect you to be able to solve my problems over 5 minutes on a podcast. So the deeper question is, I've made a little bit of progress using Podman, a little bit of progress. I have seen other people do it successfully, so I think it is possible. But I'm hitting an error with my setup, and I tried the copy the error and paste it into Google with double quotes around it trick. So it searches tries to find the exact string that you paste in and came up with nothing. So you always hate to start there when you're trying to debug a problem, and Google gives you nothing. So I wanted to ask, in your experience, how do you approach even debugging or solving a problem where you feel like you don't even know where to start? Like, I feel like I'm in a situation where I've hit the end of what my capabilities are to dive into this, and I've come up shorthanded. Are there strategies or methods that you've taken in the past to try to debug an issue where you feel like you don't even know where to go? So I feel like the common, like, it's very common as a software engineer to hit an issue or a bug or something unexpected, whatever, and we all have like our first reactions or our patterns that we fall back on for getting through stuff like that, especially once you've had a few years of experience. It's like, all right, let's try and reduce variables. Let's try and Google search their message. It's always a good one to start with. Let's try to dive in a few abstraction levels deeper to find out what's actually happening under the covers. And this is a scenario where I don't know very much about Docker. I'm not sure how to get visibility into what the SAM CLI is even doing. The error message is not helpful, and I feel like those patterns that I usually fall back on, I feel like have come up short for me. So I'm curious, like, where do you go from there? Do you have ideas of how to have ideas when you feel like you're out of them?
I think most recently I've run into a similar situation, and it wasn't that recent, but it was in the last year. It was trying to use this thing called Apache Flink, and specifically around like the configuration files that Apache Flink expects to be written in Java, or in this case it was like Scala written and compiled to like the JVM I don't know if that's a correct term or not, but it was like a mono repo of all these Flink pipelines. And it would break, and I would just be like, oh my gosh, I don't even know the first thing about this whole ecosystem. And so that's like a similar feeling. It was like, I don't even know where to start. One of the things in the past couple of years that is like super helpful to start with is just dumping it into like ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever you might use. And even if it's, I'm fairly certain they're not going to know what I'm talking about, usually like it gives you enough to like a few threads to pull. And so it'll offer up some ideas for what might be happening. Maybe it'll source it from like really out of date Stack Overflow posts or something else. Or Perplexity is one of the things that I like to use, by the way, is because it's like a Google search, but better. But that will send me down a path, and at least it'll give me something to do, because when you're stuck with something and you're stuck with this weird error message, there's nothing shows up on Google, and you just don't know where to turn. Like, it's frustrating because you don't have the next thing to do and you don't want to do next. And so having someone at least suggest something to try is like pretty helpful. So that's what I like to do. But yeah, generally if you're stuck on something, like maybe going in reverse and trying to find like, all right, what was I doing before where it was working? And what can I uncomment or comment and take away to get back to the state where it was working, and what specific thing made it not work? That's usually pretty helpful for me too. I don't know how helpful that is for composing a containerization process, but it's more like code debugging, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. I think that the AI one is a good call out, and there are some caveats around using AI tools like that in a very large organization where you have big security departments. And I'm sure there's some paperwork I'd have to fill out to even go down that route. But I think the interesting thing about that you said is, if you are really truly out of ideas, even if the AI is not going to solve it for you, or if it's not maybe going to give you the highest quality answers, it might tick off something in your mind as just, what's even a path I can explore? What's, like you said, what's a thread I can even pull on? Yeah. And a lot of times that's all you need, is to just get a little bit of momentum again, and even moving in the direction of solving the problem, because there's a lot of frustration that can happen when you feel like you've exhausted all of your paths and you haven't made any progress. I don't feel confident that ChatGPT could solve my specific issue, but maybe it could give me some avenues to look down. So I think that is worthwhile.
Yeah, you should try it. Come back next week or next podcast and tell us how it went.
I'll report back. I have one more, but do you want to go with something first, Josh, and then we can come back to me if we think we have time?
Sure. Yeah, I'll jump in. Mine is maybe less actionable, but it's more like, here's what I'm stuck on. I've been working on a project at work where we have a client-side browser library that executes in JavaScript. And each step of the way, we emit some events as we boot up this service. And we are trying to track like the life cycle of this service that starts up and eventually loads up the app. And what we're finding is that we don't have all of these metrics. Like, we have some of them, but not all of them. And ideally, like, we should have a fairly high degree of confidence that we're getting all the metrics, because if we're not getting all the metrics, it's either one, our app's not working for a certain percent of the users, which is like a lot of users, or something's wrong with our code potentially, that we're not executing and emitting these events. So it's been a challenging few weeks to chase this conundrum of where are the missing events.
That's a good one. That's a good question. To answer it just right up front before I ramble for a while is no. I don't have an idea
Me neither.
how to solve that problem. But it is a really interesting one. And this is why one of the reasons I think programming for the web is a big iceberg. Like, there's a lot under the surface of a seemingly simple job of making websites. Is that like when you ship code off to a user, to a browser, to a client, you're in like this wild, like uncontrolled environment where you just have no idea what all the variables are. You have no idea what the users are going to do. Like you said, a lot of times behavior is very erratic. So that makes the signal to noise ratio really out of whack when you're trying to do this kind of telemetry. And I think that's an underappreciated aspect of what we do as web developers, is like trying to handle and account for those scenarios is almost impossible, like at least to cover all the edge cases and stuff. Like you said, like a random extension that someone installed, 500 downloads, that speeds up their scrolling speed or whatever, can completely throw off your whole approach. And I think like it's almost like a best effort type of solution that you have to take in a lot of these instances, is like, what can we do to give us the most amount of confidence for the most amount of use cases? And sometimes that's not going to feel very good. Sometimes you're knowingly going to be dropping out or dropping a percentage of users or use cases. And a lot of times it's the web, man.
Yeah.
That's just what happens. So that's not helpful at all to your scenario, but it's something that I get reminded of every so often about being a web developer, is we're actively programming in a pretty hostile environment a lot of the times.
One of the things that makes it challenging, because like it's tempting to just be like, yeah, it's just the web. Like you're not going to hit 100%. It's going to be flaky. Like you may see multiple percentages of dropped things because of just the way it is. Like maybe one of those events didn't make it across the network, and that's fine. But the question that I come up with is, okay, what is the number? What is it? 95%? Is it 96%?
Yeah.
Like, and what makes it even harder is that we deploy changes to a CDN. Like, we would like to have alerting and SLOs for if something's a tripwire, if something goes wrong. So, hey, the red box isn't showing up red in 99% of the cases, or like we stopped getting this thing that we were expecting. You have to set a number for those values, and it's tricky. Do you set 95% as your 100% baseline, and then anything below that, then you get worried, or what? Yeah, I'm sure. I don't know if there's an answer. Honestly, I'm curious if are there other people alerting and have SLOs based on a client-side metric?
Yeah, that's interesting. I know we actually at work recently have been looking at a lot of our alerting and SLO stuff recently, because we had your classic misconfiguration where the on-call person got like 100 texts or whatever. Everything's on fire, and they go and look at it, and actually it's fine. It's just our alarms had some problems. So all I can say to you, Josh, is that's a tough one, and I hope you can figure it out.
Thank you, sir. I feel better.
Callback. That's a callback right there to our episode or our podcast title.
We have to slip that in at least once every episode.
Yep, there it is.
Austin, what's your last thing?
Yeah, so this is one that I was excited to chat with you about, Josh, because you're a prolific and wildly successful open source maintainer, and someone that's had untold success with their projects like Flare React and Hydrogen and Superflare, and I'm sure we'll dive into each of those in time. But I wanted to ask about talking about / marketing the stuff you work on. Like, we've talked about this before, but I've been working for a while on this like new front end for GitHub, basically, like a focused tool to use GitHub that's not painfully slow on every interaction, because it's only loading the stuff that you care about seeing. And I've tweeted about it a little bit. I've been working on it for a while. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more in the future. But it's something that I've heard other people are interested in this idea. I think it's pretty cool. And in the spirit of like building in public, learning in public, and talking about the stuff I'm up to, I'd like to talk about it more.
Yeah.
But I don't really know how, because I haven't really done that a whole lot in the past. And I'm curious, like, how have you found that process of sharing the things you're working on, like in a very practical sense? Are you tweeting every time you make a commit to the project and talk about this new feature, or showing screenshots and videos every time you merge a new pull request? And how have you found how to be successful in talking about a new project without being too markety?
I've had my pattern is typically toil away at something, work on it, hack on it for weeks or months, not talk about it at all. Like the thing that gets people, I think, is over promising and under delivering, like hyping something up. It's like, this is going to be the best thing in the world. I'm working on it T-10 days. And so my style is get it write a blog post about it or build a whole like documentation site for it, which is cool because then people can actually browse and play with it. And then do a big announcement tweet thread or just a tweet. And that's usually, if it strikes a chord, then that does pretty well. And I don't do much of the incremental sharing. I would love to get something where I could do that, where you're working on something in the public and there are enough like nuggets that are interesting to people and not just like this button works. Like show something that's, oh wow, in 10 seconds I see that this is going to be pretty sweet, and share that out.
I think that's the craft I'm looking to hone a little bit, is like, how do you capture a value proposition in a demo in the attention span of someone scrolling a tweet? I think there's an art to that. It's not as simple as just turning on screen recorder and futzing around your product for a little while. I think there's something to that idea of capturing the excitement that you feel about a project and being able to share that with other folks. Like an example that I think about is like when Caleb Porzio was working on Livewire, or when he's working on a new project in general. I feel like he's someone that does a good job of this, of just taking these quick screencasts. He chats about, the idea that he's excited about. He shows off a little bit about what it does and how it works. And I feel like he's gotten pretty well practiced at doing something like that. And I am not. And I think it's one of those things where I'm trying to figure out how to start. And maybe it's just start tweeting. Seeing what happens.
It's important to remember not every one that you share is going to be a banger either. Like the stuff that I think is the most exciting in the world, like I'll get 2 likes on it. And maybe it's just the algorithm too. And then the stuff that you don't expect to do very well, it blows up. And so that's funny. And maybe the game, unfortunately with social, the game is just quantity a lot of the time. Yeah. But I think I just remembered one of the accounts that I really enjoy is TL Draw. Do you know the founder of that? Steve something?
Steve, yep.
Yeah, he just shares stuff like every week, and it's all he's lucky because it's an extremely visual software. Yes. It's literally a canvas, and so it's so easy to do a demo. But like all the real-time sync stuff and AI stuff that was so cool seeing that develop over time. I know Sunil does really good with sharing the party kit stuff over the years. So yeah, I think you'll find it. You just need to start sharing and be comfortable with the fact that it might not land with people, and that's okay.
Yeah. I think another interesting point is like mentioning about TL Draws, like that's just a naturally very visual product, and it lends itself to demos very easily. I think a lot of the interesting stuff with the project I'm working on is more behind the scenes, like data loading strategies and caching and syncing, preloading and that kind of thing. That's a little bit harder to demo, I think. And a lot of times this loads very quickly and GitHub loads slower than this. So maybe there are opportunities for like comparisons or side by sides or that kind of thing. But do you have any thoughts on like how do you communicate and demo the more behind the scenes aspects?
Yeah, that's tough. We can talk about this in a future episode, the local first stuff. What are people getting their excitement from with that? Because that's a very hard thing to demo and it's very complicated. Are they loading up the application tab in Chrome and DevTools and showing, look at all the stuff I have in this? That's what you're showing, which is really cool, but it's also very not sexy to look at. I don't know. It's a good question. I look forward to seeing whatever you produce.
Yeah, me too.
Cool. Let's get ready to wrap things up here. We've yapped for a while, as the youth say. I would like to end each episode with just sharing a fun thing that has us excited. We should come up with a name for it, like fun facts, or we'll figure it out. But my thing happens to be a tech project that I've had my eye on for a while, but just used today for the first time. It's called NuxtHub, N-U-X-T Hub. It is a project built by the creators of Nuxt, which is a meta framework for Vue.js. And NuxtHub is like a deployment platform pretty much, but it's built completely on top of Cloudflare. So you literally onboard, connect your GitHub. It sends you off to Cloudflare to create an API key and you dump it in. Then it lets you hook up a GitHub repo and handles the deploy to like Cloudflare workers or pages. I don't know what it is for sure under the hood, but then they hook in to Cloudflare D1, which is a SQLite, R2 for blob storage, KV, presumably queues and stuff is available too, but like it's really slick, very easy to onboard. They even have in a online hub dashboard for interacting with your like database. It has like the table rows and everything. I think it's powered by Drizzle Studio or whatever. It's very slick, just very well designed too. So kudos to that team. It's my dream. I wanted to build something like that, but for PHP. So check it out.
This is super cool. And it's something I've thought about in the past as well, because Cloudflare's products are extremely unique in the ecosystem. They enable really cool stuff that I'm going to chat about with my pick in a second here as well. But actually using the Cloudflare dashboard and getting into the Cloudflare website is not my favorite experience. I think they're not quite to the Vercel standard, I guess, is how I would put it, of design and ease of use, UX, that kind of thing. So I think this is super interesting. I think it's interesting that they chose to specialize in Nuxt, like picking one framework to just make the experience really seamless. I think that's an interesting choice. I'd be curious, like, how tied the underlying mechanisms are to using Nuxt, or if this is something that could be genericized in the future, because I know I would definitely use it for SvelteKit or Remix or something like that.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet.
Very cool.
What's your pick?
Yeah, so I wanted to chat about PartyServer from our friend Sunil Pai, who you mentioned earlier. And it's interesting. You've probably heard, if you follow Sunil, seen him talk about PartyKit in the past. Was a project he'd been working on for a couple of years. I think he's actually was acquired by Cloudflare or rejoined Cloudflare to work on his projects, and he just dropped this PartyServer earlier this week, which is how I'm taking it as maybe like the next iteration of PartyKit, or the next idea in kind of the PartyKit realm of doing real-time stuff built on Cloudflare workers, and just making like a toolkit basically for real-time apps. So he's got a lot of stuff on the roadmap, a lot of stuff he wants to work on, but he has YJS integrations. He's got PubSub built out with the PartySub package, and I think it's a great market to be disrupted by Cloudflare and Sunil with this PartyServer integration, because the real-time space is tough. It's hard to build real-time stuff, especially the infrastructure pieces are hard in the serverless landscape, especially like if you don't have a long-running server, then how do you even do this? A lot of those questions crop up. So I'm really curious to see where PartyServer goes, to build something on it just to get a feel for the workflow. But Cloudflare and Sunil are well positioned to solve that problem for us. So I'm excited to see where it ends up.
Me too. I'm super excited to try it out and figure out like what to build with it, because I would love to get more involved with durable objects and all real-time things. And it seems like such a cool thing waiting to be, tapped into. So pumped.
Absolutely. So best of luck to Sunil and the Cloudflare folks.
This has been the first episode of Josh and Austin Figure It Out. I hope we figured it out.
I hope we figured something out. I don't know if we figured it out, but
we figured out how to record a podcast.
We recorded a podcast. That was the main goal for today, was to record a podcast, and we did it. We figured it out.
We will talk to you next time about something.
Yep, we'll figure it out then.